and gentlemen, dear colleagues, also those online, it's my very pleasure to welcome you to this joint side event by Chad, Nigeria, and Terry from India. The side event is on strengthening climate action through NDCs that are enhanced through transparency. And we will hear about some very interesting country experiences in Africa, Asia, and Latin America from a set of outstanding speakers. My name is Henning Wüster. I'm the director of the Initiative for Climate Action Transparency, and ICAT is honored to be able to support this side event for our partners here. Let me introduce to you our moderator, and we are very pleased to have with us Justin Johnson. Justin is Director of Climate at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. Prior to being at the CIF, Justin worked for a UK-based energy company and was Special Advisor to the UK Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Justin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Henning, and good afternoon to everyone in the room and to those who are joining online as well. As you say, it's a great pleasure and honor to be moderating this event with such distinguished panels and on such an important subject as well. Data and transparency is the backbone of the Paris Agreement. Sound data and information systems enable the effective design, the effective implementation, and the effective tracking of action and NDCs, which is the kind of the fundamental core of the Paris Agreement and our collective ambition. So I'm very honored to introduce a panel, distinguished panel. They'll be providing some initial remarks, and then I'll invite a question to each of them, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor and to those online. And as Dr. Wüster said, we've got a great set of guests here who can talk about the real country experiences and the stories of implementing ICAT and transparency work. We'll start with Dr. Peter Tafa, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Labour and Environment at Nigeria. And following him will be Mrs. Halima Bawawari, Acting Director, Department of Climate Change at the Federal Ministry of Environment from Nigeria. Then I'm pleased that the Nigerian perspective will be followed by Chad, and we're pleased that the Honourable Kedabala, member of the National Assembly, Chad will be speaking. And following him, Ms. Ana Lucia Moyamora from Costa Rica and the Ministry of Energy and Environment there. And then very delighted that His Excellency Manjeev Singh Puri, former Ambassador of India and Distinguished Fellow now at TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute, provide some reflections on the India perspective. And then we'll hear from Ms. Luisa Rodka from the Federal Ministry of Environment, Natural Conservation and Nuclear Safety from the Government of Germany, one of the donors and long-term partners of ICAT. So we're really looking forward to hearing country experiences. As I said, we'll hear that, have some questions, and then open it up to discussion. But to just introduce ICAT and the work to date, I'd like to invite Dr. Henning Wüster to give some opening remarks. Director of ICAT, formerly IRENA, and the Green Climate Fund, and various UN roles, including at the UNFCCC. So, hand it over to you, Dr. Wüster.
Thank you, Justin. So let me just give you the reason why we organized this side event with our partners. This side event is about how data and information that countries collect for their transparency frameworks help strengthening the climate actions that they have included in their NDCs. So data driving NDCs, both in terms of NDC development and NDC implementation. As you all know well, transparency is the backbone of the Paris Agreement. It is a hard obligation for both developed and developing countries. But what is much more important is that it presents an opportunity that allows countries to build a sound basis for making climate action in countries more effective and thus sustainable for the long term. Over recent years, we have been very happy to see a considerable increase in the level of attention given to climate action in connection with the round of NDC revisions. Together with this, the level of interest in building data frameworks as a basis for NDC revisions grew significantly. Countries really became interested in having their own climate data frameworks to prepare NDC revisions that make sense for their national realities. Initial NDCs were often prepared in a rush, very clearly, with very little, if any, national ownership. Many countries now chose to take a different approach. But in order to link NDC action to national realities, there's a need for some homework to prepare the sound data and information that is required. And we've seen some outstanding activities in many countries unfold. In some cases on paper, the revised NDCs may not be much more ambitious than the initial NDCs. I'm, however, convinced that they are in reality. The initial NDCs had no chance of ever being implemented. The revised ones are now firmly anchored in national realities based on the data that countries have been able to gather. So they have a much greater chance to move ahead into real implementation. Data is also essential to raise ambition. Sound data frameworks are needed to engage stakeholders when aiming for transformational change, to substantiate the arguments that support the fundamental changes required to link climate action to national development priorities. Sound data will, for instance, be needed to drive a just transition. But the biggest challenge still lies ahead for many countries. Developing NDCs, I always say, was easy compared to moving them forward on implementation. Again, sound data frameworks and transparency will be key. Many of the data and assessments mentioned before will remain relevant. In addition, NDC implementation requires strong tracking frameworks, co-owned by all relevant stakeholders. An M&E framework will help evaluate outcomes ex post and set the basis for further strengthening of NDCs in the next round of revisions. And most importantly, M&E frameworks will be required to mobilize finance, which equally applies to mitigation and adaptation. ICAT is very pleased to work with the countries we will hear from today. It's been absolutely a pleasure and an honor to be able to collaborate with them. The ICAT projects in these countries are excellent examples how transparency efforts can advance climate action. Let me, however, emphasize that while ICAT has been pleased to provide expert input and resources for these efforts, the actual work was conducted by national experts under the guidance of the respective ministries, some of which are represented here. And I certainly want to acknowledge their excellent collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we've heard very clearly the view that sound data and frameworks are key to implementation, that the work ICAT is partnering with others on is an opportunity to make climate action more effective, more enduring, and linked to the national reality. So let's hear from some of the national reality and experiences now and hear that perspective. So first, I'd like to introduce from Nigeria, Dr. Peter Tafa, Permanent Secretary. And I understand that Nigeria has been working with ICAT to implement sectoral MRV systems with a focus on 3 sectors: the oil and gas sector, transport, and land use. So I'd invite you to make some comments. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure actually to be here today. My Honorable Minister of State ought to have been sitting here to present these short remarks, but she had to go back to the capital. But truly speaking, it's a great pleasure to be here in this gathering on strengthening climate action through the NDC and the enhanced transparency. It's important that we have gotten the opportunity to also be at this COP to share these experiences with other sister countries that have also gotten support from ICAT for this initiative. On the onset, let me also appreciate ICAT for their support to Nigeria in developing this overarching sectoral MRV, which you rightly indicated, focused around three sectors. We signed this project cooperative agreement sometimes in September 2020 and set up a sectoral MRV system with an overarching institutional arrangement across three priority sectors for Nigeria. This is representing 5 subsectors over a period of 12 months. So since that period, we have been working on this. And these sectors, not specifically in any order, but it included the oil and gas sector, the road transportation, other transportation modes, which includes like the railway, the marine and aviation, the land use change and forestry, as well as agriculture, specifically looking at livestock and crops. Consequently, after all this setup, the project consultants were actually engaged and have been working with ICAT international consultants, specifically SAITEPA of France and the GHG Management Institute, to implement this project along with key stakeholders from the various MDAs. The involvement of the key stakeholders is very key because most of the data are generated through these stakeholders. I must also emphasize the significance of data collection, just like Hennings has said, in a very transparent manner and in a very inclusive manner too, which is essential for confidence building at the end of the day when the result is out. This project for Nigeria, which commenced in 2020, kick-started with an intensive stakeholder consultations and review of policy documents as per the project terms of reference. And this led us to achieving the following. We conducted a needs and gap analysis for the focus sectors, that is oil and gas, transport, and AFOLO, to identify the sector-specific issues and how to address them with technical support from ICAT. We have also been able to develop a robust institutional arrangement in the focus sectors to enhance transparency reporting in line with enhanced transparency framework. We are in the process of completing the national institutional arrangement for the country, and also we have worked out the assessment of policies and measures to develop NDC indicators and tools, which is still an ongoing process across the sectors. The one central need for the sustainability of all this process is capacity building, which we have been able to undertake among the relevant stakeholders and is still an ongoing issue. It will interest this gathering to note that our final product will be validated and adopted in December by key stakeholders, and it will mark the end of the project to support the transparency tracking of the Paris Agreement. In addition to what I have said, ICAT also supported Nigeria through this collaboration with the international entities and to evaluate Nigeria's transport sector climate core benefits using the TRACE tool, to which Nigeria very much appreciated. So let me just end these few remarks by seizing this opportunity to once more thank the management of ICAT as hosted by UNOP for this timely support, which will enable us to transparently track our NDC implementation. And as you know, the NDC implementation too has been, or our NDC, the revised NDC has has an enhanced ambition. It used to be 20% conditional, unconditional, and then 45% with conditional. But it has now been shifted slightly or enhanced to 45% with international support, that is conditional. So thank you for this opportunity to be here, and we look forward to further collaboration with ICAT and all other partners for the betterment of our own environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks, and the gratitude to ICAT is well noted, but as Henning indicated, it's clear that there's deep ownership and leadership within the government as well that's brought it about. And let's hear a little bit more about that. I'd like to invite Ms. Halima Bawawari to add an additional perspective as Acting Director at the Ministry of Climate Change.
Thank you. Can I go over there?
Yes, please do, and I believe you have some slides as well. So,
and I hope this new trend of the UNFCCC necklace I'm wearing would catch speed. Thank you for the floor, and Mr. Hennings and all those on the panel, including my former boss and still my boss, Dr. Tarfa. Basically, I'm just to give an update on why do we develop sector-specific MRV using Nigeria as a case study. Well, why? Why? Because there's this Bali action plan, which was established to give this global monitoring and reporting and verification of the MRV system, and we want to also be in compliance with that. And it enables us as UNFCCC parties to report on our climate change action. The purpose basically of establishing a domestic MRV system is to localize what the international reporting system is, and also to incorporate it as an integral part of our government structure. Well, so far, Nigeria, as you may know, has reported on its national communications, such as the first, we've done the first, we've done the second, and we've done the third. And we have also sent in reports on our biannual updates. And we've had a first and a second just before we came for the COP. And we also included a national inventory report. So all these reports, what happens to them? We will need to have an MRV system that will make them even better and much more transparent. So what are the sectors in Nigeria? My boss, Dr. Tarfa, had already given us an insight in what we already have within the NDCs. And as he said, we did increase our ambition on the conditional aspect of it, but then we also expanded on our priority areas. We had 5 earlier with the 20 on our own commitment and 45 initial NDC. For this tranche of the NDC, we have 20% on our own and 47% with assistance. And we've expanded sectors from 5 to 7, which you can see on the screen, just like Dr. Tarfa had expanded earlier. However, these sectors represent the key areas of our economy, and therefore an MRV is being developed through ICAT for 5 sectors, or rather, ICAT is funding and technically supporting Nigeria to do MRV in oil and gas, in transport, and the AFOLU sectors. The IPPU and water sectors are yet to be developed. However, the waste sector also is being done by the EU. The basis for a sector-specific MRV system, as you've heard from the facilitator and Mr. Hennings and my boss earlier, it's basically to give us some leverage on data collection, making it more transparent, making it more available, and the need it needs to be resolved on the sectoral basis. And an MRV system allows for assessment and comparison of GHG actions across sectors. It also helps the country to identify sectoral NAMAs. It helps us to in decision making for mitigation projects. For example, if we have a mitigation project that has high emission reduction potentials and at low cost, of course, we will likely pick that for implementation. What is further the basis for a specific MRV system? The status of the MRV implementation varies by sector. As you know, in the oil and gas, these are advanced in their sectors. Data collection and data flow arrangement and institutional arrangements are well advanced. The role of the national and subnational governments and entities by sector differs. As you can see, if it's the AFOLO and the waste and transport sector, it's easier to collect at the subnational level, and this can be best done by subnational partners. What's the progress so far? My work has been made easy by my boss. We have, with the ICAT support, financial and technical, been able to conduct a needs and gap analysis for the focus sectors which ICAT is dealing with, which is oil and gas, transport, AFOLO, to identify sector-specific issues and to address them. We have also been able to develop a robust institutional framework in these sectors. As you've also heard from Dr. Tarfa, we have completed an overarching sectoral MRV institutional arrangement, which is to be subjected to validation by stakeholders. Work is still going on assessing the kind of policies and measures we need to develop the NDC indicators and tools. There's also, as you've heard earlier, ongoing work on capacity building among the relevant stakeholders that we'll have to work with in developing the MRVs within the sector that the ICAT is providing support to Nigeria for. With that being said, I join my voice with that of Dr. Tarfa and the country as a whole to thank the ICAT for the support they have provided Nigeria and work we look forward to doing together in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those remarks, and it's a really interesting flavour of some of the detail and some of the practicalities that you've been through, and I applaud you on the clarity of it. It seems pretty comprehensive in terms of your sectoral focus, but I recognise the sectoral piece. Now we'll look to a more national focus, and I'm going to introduce the Honourable Kedabala from Chad, a member of the National Assembly there. And Chad is strengthening its capacity to implement a national MRV system to monitor the performance of targeted mitigation policies and to prepare for the further biennial transparency reports. So I'd like to hand over to you, Honourable Kedabala. And for those of you who have got your translation devices, you may need them.
Merci. Merci. Monsieur le Directeur Général de l'ICAT, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, distingués panélistes, Mesdames et Messieurs, je voudrais avant tout propos remercier Monsieur Henning Wester, Directeur Général de l'ICAT, et lui exprimer au nom du gouvernement de la République du Tchad toute notre gratitude pour l'initiative louable d'organiser cette réunion et de nous y convier. Dans cette mise en œuvre de sa contribution déterminée au niveau national, le Tchad a démontré sa volonté de contribuer à l'effort mondial de réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et de renforcer sa résilience au changement climatique en mettant en œuvre des programmes cohérents tout en privilégiant dans la mesure des moyens à sa portée un développement sobre en carbone. Le grand défi à relever pour notre pays est donc de passer d'ici 2030 d'un modèle de développement basé sur la rente pétrolière à un modèle reposant sur une économie plus diversifiée avec une valorisation durable des ressources disponibles et une transition énergétique. Pour assurer cet engagement, il était donc indispensable pour le Tchad, conformément au cadre de transparence renforcé de l'accord de Paris, de disposer des mécanismes lui permettant de quantifier les émissions de gaz à effet de serre au niveau national ainsi que leur évolution dans le temps et de fournir périodiquement des données robustes reflétant les progrès du pays en matière d'atténuation et d'adaptation. C'est ainsi qu'en marge de la COP25 à Madrid ont eu lieu entre les représentants du gouvernement de la République du Tchad et les représentants de l'initiative pour la transparence de l'action climat sous la houlette de M. Henning Wester, dont l'implication et le leadership personnel a permis d'aboutir à la signature d'un protocole d'accord le 28 août 2020 pour la mise en œuvre d'un projet de renforcement des capacités pour le développement d'un système national de mesures, reportage et vérification et de suivi de la contribution déterminée au niveau national. À travers ce projet a été développé un système national MRV qui se veut robuste, pérenne et simple pour réaliser les inventaires de gaz à effet de serre, assurer le reportage et suivre la mise en œuvre de la contribution déterminée au niveau national. Le but du système national MRV est d'assurer un reportage efficace dans le délai et de manière pérenne dans le temps. Le système national MRV du Tchad sera opérationnalisé à l'aide d'une base de données centrale. Cette base de données centrale sera régulièrement alimentée à partir des bases de données sectorielles après un contrôle de qualité assuré par des experts de haut niveau. Le SNNRV, le système national MRV du Tchad, repose sur les 4 piliers suivants: la gouvernance, les procédures, le contrôle de qualité et assurance qualité, le renforcement des capacités. Le Tchad, en vue de pérenniser le système, a opté de disposer d'une structure technique autonome et pérenne. Ainsi, le système NRV du Tchad sera opérationnel à travers une agence nationale qui sera créée par une loi. L'agence nationale ainsi créée sera un établissement public à caractère administratif, scientifique et technique, doté d'une personnalité morale et d'une autonomie de gestion, avec pour ancrage institutionnel le ministère en charge de l'environnement. En ce qui concerne la structure de l'agence, il est prévu des organes sectoriels ou techniques qui pourront être créés selon les besoins, soit au niveau des ministères sectoriels, je parle de l'énergie, industrie, eau, agriculture et autres, des universités nationales et internationales ou de l'Institut national des statistiques et des études économiques et démographiques, soit au niveau régional comme démembrement local de l'agence. Les ressources de l'ANV, de l'Agence nationale MRV, proviendront des sources suivantes: les subventions de l'État, les rémunérations des partenaires, des prestations de services éventuels que l'agence pourra mener, les subventions des partenaires techniques et financiers ou d'autres organismes nationaux et internationaux, les pourcentages sur les prélèvements, taxes et pénalités en matière d'environnement ou de pollution, les dons et legs. Enfin, pour poursuivre, pour permettre à l'agence d'avoir à sa disposition les moyens de ses actions, il est institué une dérogation aux principes généraux en matière de comptabilité publique, lui permettant de disposer d'une comptabilité à partie double, à recouvrer directement des ressources instituées dans la loi et à les déposer dans un compte ouvert à cet effet auprès d'une banque commerciale. Pour terminer, je voudrais porter à la connaissance de l'assistance que le Tchad a officiellement soumis son CDN révisé, dont le coût s'élève à hauteur de 6 milliards de dollars, et celui du scénario conditionnel de 400 millions de dollars pour le scénario inconditionnel et pour lequel nous attendons un accompagnement de nos partenaires. Déjà, je me félicite du fait que le Parlement est bien impliqué, bien informé de la mise en place de l'agence et pourra avoir des données fiables pour le suivi de la mise en œuvre de la CDN dans notre pays. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you for those remarks and a fascinating story and country experience in the development of a central agency to coordinate ministry efforts to bring in science and technology and provide that kind of coordinated MRV experience. So thank you for sharing that. Now I'd like to to pass the floor to His Excellency Manjeev Singh Puri from TERI. ICAT and TERI have been working together on domestic MRV and transparency system in certain sectors, buildings, transport and renewable energy, but also looking at adaptation actions as well. So perhaps you'd like to provide some remarks.
Justin, thank you very much. You know, first, let me say something about this gathering that we have today. You know, I'm very delighted that you are anchoring it. I don't think many of our colleagues here are familiar with what you and your organization have been doing for climate change action in the developing world. And we are extremely grateful to you for the support that you provide and all the good work that you do. I think that needed to be acknowledged because why you are here is an important element. Of course, I don't think, again, many of you possibly are aware, but you know, an initiative on climate action and transparency could not have been headed by anyone other than Dr. Henning Wüster. He is the gentleman who, in the times of those of us with white hair, sat out there and was the one person who knew what transparency was about. Henning, thank you very much, and to your team, great. And now I want to say something else. This panel is here not as a result of an accident or coincidence. It's a meaningfully arranged panel. Let's look at who among us is here. Two countries, Nigeria and India, perhaps those geographies where some of the most meaningful climate action will take place from now into the years in the future. We have Chad, a least developed country from Africa, which really needs to take something in terms of climate action. Contribution towards the climate problem, almost zero, but vulnerability among its highest. We have Costa Rica here. If you won't mind my saying so, madam, the wonderful experimental farm, the great country which has always led from the future. And we are very proud to see you here. And we have Germany here, represented by their government, a leader who went about looking at environmental action, sustainability, at a time when many of us had almost no idea of what this was all about. Very nice to see you here. And let me tell you something about TERI. One of India's oldest and certainly one of our largest environmental, energy and sustainable development organizations. We are extremely proud to be partnering ICAT in doing this particular thing and adding the wealth of knowledge and information from India. And let me tell you, while I have the privilege of sitting here on the dais, the commitment of TERI is perhaps best understood and underscored by the fact that the Director General of TERI, Dr. Vibha Dhawan, is herself present here in the audience. Dr. Dhawan, thank you very much for being here. Now I want to point out a few other things to you. You know, why MRV? I know that many of us in the developing world always felt, oh, this is some kind of way of exposing us. This is some kind of a thing that may be problematic for us, etc. But let me say something to you. What is the importance of MRV? Is it only important to come back and have a review done at the UNFCCC and then see if you can leverage something else? No, I don't think so. I think its greatest importance is domestically. It is important for us to know where we are going as countries. What can we do domestically in our country with the data that we generate? In India, we have taken some massive actions in the recent past on Digital India, on trying to gather data. And I'll take a minute of your time. When the COVID pandemic hit, we instituted in India the largest data set of organizations to see how we could focus our actions to try and see how we could manage COVID. So we set up apps, we set up vaccination drives, and we did most of these by trying to gather the data and see what we can do. Data is therefore not just a matter to feel that your privacy is being intruded, not simply a matter that you'll be put on the mat. Data is something that you can use and use profitably. So please do undertake it for your own self. Now let me come back to our project with ICAT. You mentioned, Justin, very rightly, we have undertaken this project in two separate phases, or facets, if I may say, both mitigation and adaptation. Because no matter the great fascination of the climate world with mitigation, and I understand where the fascination comes from. I don't have to go into the geopolitics or the fact that it's energy derived, there are numbers easy to make. No, but there are two facets. And I think once again, it is COVID which has brought home to every human all over the world that even when you see a huge downturn in the global economy, climate change doesn't go away and its vagaries keep hitting you. Look at the kind of devastations we've seen only in the last 2 years. And so therefore, doing things on adaptation was particularly important. And I hope that our work and work of others will lead to a certain amount of movement towards an adaptation goal, finances for adaptation, and indeed, let me put it very bluntly, mainstreaming of adaptation. In fact, the Indian Prime Minister called for that when Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke at the plenary here. But I think we all need to understand. And what did we do in TERI in terms of adaptation and this MRV and the entire project of enhanced transparency? We looked at India. So first thing, for both our mitigation as well as our adaptation side, we said we have something very important to do. The first is to have detailed stakeholder consultations across the length and breadth of the country with different people. Now, I know for a country like India, it can only mean a handful, given the nature of our country, but we undertook this meticulously and with a great deal of detail. And in the area of adaptation, we decided to, at the moment, and we will broaden this in the coming years as this project goes forward, we decided to focus on two specific areas. One is agriculture and one is water. And I think all of you will agree that for a country of India's size, if we can focus on these two, we would have done yeoman service to our country and to the global planet. And what did we do with it? As I said, we've done stakeholder consultation. We did mappings of where we are and what exactly is happening. Building capacities at the local level, at the lower level, interacting with people and trying to tell them that, look, this is what you can do. And when you produce the data, you will find that the world will step forward to help you. If you simply say, I need help with my agriculture, what do you want the other person to say? He'll say yes. But if you tell him, this is what I need, this is what I've measured, this is what I'm reporting to you, and this is verified, the person can come back to you with specific ideas. And that's what we've done. And of course, we've given them the hope that all of this leads to sustainability, which at the end of the day is what we are all looking for our generation and the future. On mitigation, it isn't that we haven't done enough. In fact, that's where we've completed 3 frameworks. We've submitted it to ICAT, and we are hopeful that the next round of action will continue, which will allow us to move beyond national levels to subnational levels. And I might tell you, most of you would recall that for a country like India, subnational level is larger than most countries, madam, if you won't mind my saying so, at least in Europe. That's the nature of the game. If we won't move forward towards subnational places, the states in India, the large cities, we are really not going to reach out to people, and we must do it. So what are the areas that we focused on? We focused on 3 areas. Each of them are large areas, but with a tremendous potential. And we looked at what are the GHG mitigation possibilities as a result of the policies that the government of India and others have been formulating. The first is the matter that you've been hearing from everyone, the question of solar power. So we looked at utility scale solar power and the solar power scales. What are they doing? How much of a benefit are they going to see? You saw that the Prime Minister of India announced that 50% of India's power will be generated by 2030 from non-fossil fuels, and that renewables will be doing about 500 gigawatts. We are talking large numbers. But we looked at what are the implications of this policy in terms of GHG mitigation. We then looked at a sector which many people say is hard to abate, the sector of construction. And we looked at what are the new building codes, the energy efficiencies of the building codes. Are they really going to deliver? And what can we do in terms of strengthening the monitoring, the reporting, and the verification of these actions? And that's something that TERI feels very proud to have a very strong team in the organization. And we worked particularly hard. And then the buzzword today is what? Electric mobility. Everyone is talking of electric mobility. You step out here, Glasgow proudly announces the buses are all electric. India, latecomer, late mover, but we've announced huge amounts of movements in terms of electric mobility. And I dare say within the coming years itself, as a result of the shift, we might become one of the larger geographies in the use of electric vehicles. And that's another factor that we focused on. And I am happy that these things have been taken extremely seriously by an organization which has a long experience of being first mover in India, a large geography. And we want to take these forward. And Henning, I want to tell you and assure you that you have not only our committed support, but I assure you that to you and SIF and others, that the support that you provide, the capacities that we are able to build as a result of it, their impacts will certainly be in India, but given the scale and size of India, I have no doubt that they will be global and things that can contribute to global action in terms of what we can do about climate change. And I really think that transparency, the monitoring, reviewing, and reporting and verification brings those kinds of data, which is fantastically usable internationally and domestically. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that inspiring set of remarks, and I underline your point around the leadership that the panel has demonstrated both as individuals and as organizations and countries that they represent, and not least Henning and his team. And I will of course include you in that as well. The leadership you've demonstrated both in your own right and with Terry is world renowned. You mentioned, we've heard a little bit around some sectoral approaches, we've heard about a national approach, we've heard about adaptation and the subnational opportunities. Now let's turn to, as you called it, the wonderful Costa Rica, and hear a little bit from Ms. Ana Lucia Moyamara. I hear a little bit, I think, about how you've been integrating transparency into sustainable development, into transformational change, synergies with the SDGs, and some of the work you're doing around developing a carbon market. So it'd be great to hear a little more about that approach you've taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the ICAT, to Henning, to the team, and definitely to the ambassador for the kind words. So first, I want to start telling you a little bit about Costa Rica's latest NDC. We updated on the 2020. Our first NDC was in 2015, and the second one, I think that's something that is important to highlight, just to start telling this story, is that it has two different approaches, right? One on mitigation. We want to be a net zero country by 2050. And then on this second NDC, we put up a budget in order to achieve the 2050 target with a point on 2030. But then I think most important improvement of the second NDC of Costa Rica is that it includes also considerations regarding just transition, regarding climate justice, because we think that definitely this transition of becoming a net zero country has to take us, to take Costa Rica, to take the world to a better place. It's not just being climate, net zero countries and super technological, but then we have to think in the people that are going to be in that world, and we need to understand what the people actually need in order to be able to get to 2050, to reduce inequalities and to improve the well-being of the citizens, of the people, and also the ecosystems. So in that sense, and regarding also the data part that you are also asking, for the construction of the NDC itself, we did a mixed approach of modeling tools in order to be able to construct our mitigation target. But then, and I think one of the most important parts of that process was actually the consultation, the participatory process that we enhance relations with several communities. We opened a process with vulnerable communities. For example, youth was very important in the process. We also had discussions with Afro communities, with, and now I just forgot the communities, I'm sorry. But with the most vulnerable communities. For example, trans people were also a particular group, indigenous groups were also a particular group. And what we asked them was what they actually need in order to be able to join into this transition. And building on that, we are now in the process of implementing the NDC. We already have the targets, but what we want to know is if in the implementation process, we're actually going to get to a better place. And for that, definitely we have our policies and measures that are going to be implemented to reduce the emissions that we said we were going to reduce. But then we want to understand how those policies, how those actions are actually transforming the Costa Rica as the way we envision. And because sometimes also there's the development agenda and there's the climate agenda, and they sometimes are thought differently, right? And the way we think of this is that this has to be this process has to be merged, because the development is going to have deeply the climate change concepts and the climate change targets also embedded very intrinsically in order to be able to actually connect all the dots. And therefore, what we're doing, and I think definitely has been a very interesting process with ICAT support, has been to try to understand, to try to actually estimate the impacts of sustainable development and transformational change of the mitigation actions that we are implementing. We did a pilot with 3 mitigation actions, and definitely it was very successful for us. We took the guidelines that ICAT developed and basically transformed it into something that could fit into the process of MRV of Costa Rica. That we are building a system, it's called CINAMEC, that is going to be the system, it's basically an MRVs of MRVs. So we have the climate finance part, the adaptation part, and the mitigation part, with a transversal concept, with a transversal area of sustainable development in order to understand how everything is contributing to this change. The way we are working on this towards is to have everything, is to have all the NDC's mitigation actions that are going to be accounted on the VTRs. Also, to have those mitigation actions with the analysis of transformational change and sustainable development. And this has been very interesting because on the pilots that we have developed, there were 3 different pilots on 3 different stages of implementation. But for the ones that were just starting the implementation, the process actually helped us to understand which were the areas that they were not particularly addressing. For example, we had a project of a bikeway between 2 different municipalities, and doing this analysis of how the project was impacting sustainable development, we discovered that actually the project had not any particularly actions in order to be able to ensure that the gender was included in the activities. And so the analysis help us and help the project implementers say, hey, maybe we can also think how we can include gender, how we can help with this project to get more women using bikes. And definitely that is something that is going to be happening with the other projects that we are going to be working in the future. And just to close my intervention, the other point that we think is very important, and the other reason we are also doing this, is because of the finance part. That is also very important to be able to achieve our targets. They're ambitious targets, and we definitely need finance in order to get there. And as many of you might know, the donors now are asking for not just mitigation itself, but they also want to fund transformation. And then what is the transformation, how the countries can actually ensure the donor that the project they are applying for is transformational. That's an open question, and there are many ways of answering that question. But with these guidelines and with this structure that we're building into, what we are thinking is that it also is going to help us to have more access to funding and to actually prove to have a clear framework to provide information on how the projects that Costa Rica is implementing are transformational. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent example, with so much in there, so much richness, but I really like the example of how the data could inform policy making and really make a smart decision when you looked at the data and how it fitted with the SDGs, so thank you. SIF's privileged to be a modest donor to the ICAT initiative, but we're small compared to the sort of the generousness of the German government, as well as the British government and others, the Italian as well, I believe. So I'm really pleased to invite Ms. Luisa Rödke from the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety, BMU, of course, famous leader in ministries that works through ICI, the International Climate Initiative, on a range of different things, and has been a long-term funder and partner for ICAT. So having heard so much of this and and been part of the ICAT journey for so long, it would be wonderful to hear your reflections. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much also for this very nice introduction, and I'm really pleased to be here and to join this panel, this side event of ICAT. And also, first of all, thank you very much to everyone who presented the examples and the work you are doing in order to gather data and how to organize the work in the different sectors. Very, very interesting for me. Maybe let me start with some words about myself. My name is Luisa Rödke, and I'm from the German Environment Ministry, and I was recently appointed as head of division for international climate policy. So for me, it's really new. Also ICAT, so I'm very proud to be here and to learn about the work that's already undertaken and that will be done in the future. And I will gradually take over the responsibilities actually from my predecessor Nicole Wilke. I don't know, maybe some of you might know her. She is working for, she has been working for a very, very long time in the international climate policy field. And one of the tasks and responsibilities is also to represent the BMU in this ICAT donor steering committee. And I have been asked to say a few words in representation of this donor steering committee. And actually we are 4, and it includes the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, the Italian Ministry for Ecological Transition, the Climate Works Foundation, which currently holds a share of the committee, and also the BMU. So it's on behalf of these donors. I found really all the presentations very, very interesting, and I'm not only interesting, it's also to better understand how to organize work, how to engage with stakeholders, and I also have to admit it's more or less in the countries it's very similar. We are also engaging with stakeholders and trying to gather information, also always new information, and of course also to get information with regard to policy decisions and to be informed about policy decisions. So that's really very good, and I also learned today that there's a high appreciation regarding the work of ICAT, and also about you, Henning Wüste. So that's very nice to hear. That's very nice for us. I think we all hope that we will reach agreement tonight, hopefully, or at least tomorrow, on the enhanced transparency framework. So then everything is in place, and of course then we want and must shift our focus even more to capacity building. That's what we want to do. We want to support to really those countries that need it, and we really would like to support this sharing of experience, sharing of information, really in order to deliver on the requirements of the enhanced transparency framework. And I think that's maybe true for all of us. We think it's very, very important to have this enhanced transparency framework. It's a tool to support trust among each other, because then we have the information that are transparent, accurate, complete, and coherent. And that, of course, is very important for better understanding each other, to know where we stand, and of course also with a view to better understand where we are and to what kind of discussion we have to, or to be better prepared for the discussion also with regard to the global stocktake. That's well ahead of us. What else? I think what I would also like to mention is that, of course, I think ICAT is working for several years already in the field and supports the capacity building, and of course we are committed to continuing in this way, and that's especially with a view to the preparation of the submission of the first biannual transparency report by the end of 2024, but of course we also committed to extend our support beyond the first submission. And yeah, we think, as already mentioned, it's very important to improve the databases and the data use, and to improve the reporting over time. And actually with that, thank you very much again for this very interesting contributions. I also would like to thank again the ICAT Secretariat for organizing this workshop, and I'm really looking forward to the following discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. We're a little short of time, so I'm just going to ask one question to each of the panelists and request they keep it brief, building on their remarks, and we'll see if we've got time to take a round from the floor as well. At the beginning, Henning outlined how transparency is the backbone of the Paris Agreement, that sound data is key to identifying, designing, implementing, and then tracking policy progress, which then enables enhanced NDCs, and that the secret has been about being country-led, country-specific, but also sharing best practice and enabling support to be accessed. So we heard that assertion, and then we heard a lot of rich country experiences which brought in different aspects to see how that had come to life. And from Nigeria, we heard a lot about how there was a lot of stakeholder engagement. It was a very inclusive approach, and taking the sector by sector look. And I believe it was coming to conclusion in December. So I'd just like to ask, what are your next steps? How do you now want to use the data you've been gathering and the stakeholders you've been bringing together to advance your NDC implementation? And I'd invite either of you to comment on that.
Thank you for that. Yes, certainly we have to reiterate that the generation, the synthesis or analysis of this data, the archiving and ease of retrieval is very central to continuity of the trust or the quality of this data. For us, we feel it is also very essential to include institutions like the academic institutions that also have a role to play in data generations across data providers. So it is one of the key areas that we will want to go into going forward, and also to put in place a mechanism for continuous updating of this data, because it keeps on changing with time, certainly. So what will be the mechanism? At the press of a button, you easily have it. With that, it can be easy to compare or to generate future reports that are obligatory of countries. So bringing in stakeholders, building the capacity of these data providers for them to really know the current method of generating this data. Not until when we are about preparing a document, that is when we go to the institutions to start looking for data. But if there is a mechanism to continually be providing this data as they undertake their processes, and also bringing in institutions of research institutions from the universities to be part of the whole process. But the current person on the decks also have our own vision and direction.
So basically he's giving most of it, but in addition, we do have now what we call the climate registry, and most of this is going to go in there, and he just told us we need to have something at the touch of the button, which we already have now. So all the data feeds into the registry, and of course that same data we hope to use in establishing the GHGI inventory system. So it's something we'll use, yes, for the NDCs going forward, making them more transparent. We're also going to use the same data, as he said, in the universities. We get asked a lot about data to do a lot of work in other aspects of environment and out of it also.
Thank you. That resonates well with the experiences we heard from Chad and the establishment of an MRV agency. I believe that's going to be going through the National Assembly and voted for by you and your colleagues and may become law. Could you tell us a little bit about that process and the establishment of the agency, which I think follows the points we've just heard around the need to synthesize the data and make it more routinely accessible, bringing in relevant institutions?
Merci beaucoup. Je dois dire déjà qu'au niveau de l'Assemblée nationale, toutes les dispositions sont prises en ce sens que l'Assemblée nationale a une commission permanente sur les objectifs de développement durable. Elle a également une commission sur le développement rural et environnement et qui sont impliquement liées au suivi du mécanisme de mise en œuvre de tout ce qui touche les changements climatiques, de la mise en œuvre attendue de la CDN. Le processus sera simple. J'ai pu déjà vous dire qu'aujourd'hui, le projet de loi est déjà élaboré au niveau du gouvernement. Il existe. Et ce projet de loi sera validé dans peu de temps, par le gouvernement et en même temps par la Cour suprême. Ce que nous pouvons faire, et moi, ce que je peux faire déjà au retour dans mon pays, c'est de faire la restitution de tout ce que j'ai entendu et j'ai vu ici, et de procéder à l'information et la formation de l'ensemble des députés sur l'agence que nous entendons mettre en œuvre. Et cette préparation de députés permettra, quand la loi arrivera à son adoption à l'Assemblée nationale, ce ne sera que l'information des députés, puisqu'ils savent déjà la pertinence et l'intérêt pour notre pays, et le fait que, comme l'a souligné ici l'Inde, le fait que le Tchad veut se lancer dans la contribution efficace de la lutte contre les changements climatiques, et cette loi passera sans doute, j'ai pu vous le dire, sans difficulté, et elle sera votée par l'Assemblée nationale. Le processus est déjà en cours. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we wish you all the best and continue to provide any input and support as required to help that discussion. You mentioned India, and maybe Ambassador Puri, we've heard a little bit about the sort of machinery and operationalization of this from others, but you also talked about the scale and the opportunity that India presents itself with, including going down into the subnationals, including looking at adaptation and mitigation. What is your view of your vision of where this MRV and data and transparency debate is moving? Where do you see India moving forward next in this space?
Justin, thank you very much. So, you know, let me make one point here. If you hear most of my colleagues here on the panel, they're all representing government departments. We are a think tank, an institution which has worked very closely with governments, which works very closely with government. So what is it that we are actually doing? We are trying to make frameworks which governments at subnational level, at states level, cities, and even thereafter the national government can take advantage of, and I have no doubt they will. You know, let me draw the attention of people to what's been happening in India. I think in the last 4 or 5 years, the largest, perhaps in the world, the largest efforts at digitalization, at empowering people through national identity cards, biometrics, all these kinds of activities. In fact, data-driven economic activities in India have become the mode and the way forward. So what do we see? That the frameworks that we are doing are frameworks which will allow people, even at subnational level, to easily be able to put together the data which they have, in any case, usually dispersed over things, put them all together and thereafter tailor, let me say, very exact policies which are targeted. Usually, you know, what happens in large economies is there may be money, there may be capacity, but much of it gets frittered because non-targeted interventions keep happening. We've seen it in India. Some of our largest programs, for example, midday meal schemes, etc., have got, you know, in a sense, a lot of monies, etc., got wasted, frittered away. We believe that if you do data-driven approaches at all levels, whether it is the central government, whether it's the governments at the states, but cities and others, especially as you come lower down, the data allows you to do targeted interventions, which then try and focus on what was your objective. So if your objective was, for example, that we will ensure that in this particular locality, everything will be renewable energy, only solar power. Are you able to measure it? And we are not talking of, you know, a few hundred square meters, but we are talking about several, let me say, 100 square kilometers. What are you going to be able to do about it? How exactly are you going to get this information? And thereafter, what are the targeted interventions that you will do? So we believe that this is an inevitability. This is happening in India. It's being driven by the government, but it is something that the people, the private sector, the corporates, and even the NGOs have embraced. And so I have no doubt in my mind that will go forward. What I see is very important is frameworks. And I think that's where Terry is stepping in to provide the necessary frameworks which others can then utilize in terms of what they have to do with the data, take their decisions and work on it for the benefit of the people and of course the globe.
Thank you. That's very clear. I really take this point around data-driven approach means targeted and effective interventions, and that can be accelerated with frameworks. As well as effective interventions, it can also unlock potentially some finance. And Costa Rica, you talked a little bit about that in the Costa Rican experience and how, I think you talked about how transformational change opportunities can potentially access more finance. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
Thank you. Yes, I think this is definitely a very important point. We have been applying to several projects, and that's a commonality that I think is appearing more and more, right? That in order to be able to access to funds, for example, to the GCF, for example, sometimes to the JEF, NAMA facility also is having some particular criteria related to transformational change. There's this question, and it is almost like an open question because no one is very certain on how transformational change is actually measured. And sometimes countries, and I'm going to say we also did it that way, we put something there very narrative, you know, like very just like the way we were foreseeing the project. And I remember quite clearly the NAMA facility particularly because they even have a number. So you have to say from 1 to 5 how transformational is your project. And then where does this number come from, right? So in order to be able to have more strength, projects that have more power in the competitions that at the end we have to get into in order to be able to access to funds, it's definitely not something nice, but it's the reality. There's some important, I think, tricks that maybe are out there that we need to take advantage on. And I think thinking on transformational change, including this perspective, definitely help us to get more access to finance. And not just financing itself, but it also, as I mentioned before, since it's a new perspective, that is definitely something that most of us are actually thinking when we are designing the projects, right? But definitely without a clear framework, as the ambassador just mentioned, sometimes it's more difficult to actually get together all these ideas that are in our head. So having this clear framework also helps to improve the design of the project, to improve who the project is getting involved in, how the actions that the project is going to be executing are actually involving more people, are actually impacting the livelihood of more people. So it just definitely the finance part is an important, because without finance nothing happens, and that's a problem. But then also it is important because it changes the way the project, the mitigation action is thought, and also the way the mitigation action is implemented. Having also clear indicators, that's where we are right now, trying to find indicators to actually measure this with through time. And sometimes this part is particularly difficult because transformational change doesn't happen like for example, in 5 years. You need to understand and to have a framework of MRV, in this case, for a broader period of years, probably sometimes even 30 years, 50 years. And that's important to keep in mind in order just not to have a long-term perspective, a short-term perspective, but a long-term perspective of what is the change you want to achieve.
Thank you. Super insightful set of comments. Thank you. We're running pretty tight on time, so I don't think, unfortunately, we're going to have a chance to get any questions from the audience. But I take the responsibility of that as chair. I'm certain that there are going to be opportunities for you to reach out to Henning or any of the other panelists if you've got any questions. This was about sharing the rich country experiences that have been happening, so that we can hear more of the stories of putting the data into action. Maybe a few quick closing remarks from Henning while we can, and then I'll draw it to an end. So would you like to provide some reflections?
Thank you very much. Yes, well, happy to say a few closing remarks. I'm first of all very pleased and want to thank for all the kind words that I heard about the work of ICAT, and I'm happy that we have 2 donors here on the panel that I can pass it on to Germany and CIF, and I hope at least online we have the other donors, Italy and Climate Works Foundation, so that I can pass it on to them. I think one concept that was very central was the people-centered approach. And we had it from very different perspectives, from the different countries that spoke. But I think it brings and summarizes with one keyword what all the approaches are trying to achieve. And of course, that is not a simple matter to accomplish. It does require a good, sound approach, a very diligent work on data and stakeholder engagement. And I think we have, again, had very nice examples to illustrate how that can be done in different realities and from different perspectives, and also from different starting points that we clearly have. I think it's great to understand the need for institutional arrangements, and it's fantastic that we have a member of parliament here with us, because I think they are key in making sure that such an institutional arrangement actually happens. And I think that is, again, one of the lessons that should be spread and should be picked up by others. One of my objectives coming here was to lift transparency out of the niche of technicians, and I think the discussion today has demonstrated that it has been successful. I think it's understood as something that actually has a policy relevance and importance. And I think what the panel also showed is that the power of example is much greater than a lot of conceptual and theoretical work, even though that is also important. But ICAT reacts to that by trying to enhance much more peer-to-peer engagement. We are bringing together countries in bilateral setting so that they can learn from each other, exchange experience, also in a multilateral setting, in a regional setting. And we are now creating regional climate action transparency hubs so that we can have the expertise actually in the regions where they need to be, where they can engage then with national experts, and where there's much more ownership and that peer-to-peer engagement among the experts of the countries that are in the same situation and can advance work together. So I'm very grateful to you, Justin, for moderating this wonderful panel, and to the speakers for excellent contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henning. Well, I would like to thank Nigeria, Chad and Terry again for hosting this and enabling us to have this discussion. I'd like to thank very much our panel of distinguished guests for a really insightful and rich discussion and the beginning, I think, of even more stories and country experiences to share. I'd like to thank you, the audience, both here and online, for listening and participating. And please, if you have questions, come up afterwards. There's plenty of time for that discussion. I'd like to thank the ICAT team, both Henning and his team, and also the wider network of funders and partners who make ICAT happen. There's a new website coming out, so check out the website and follow ICAT on social media and other things to learn more about what's going on around the world of transparency to enable action. So with that, I'd like to have a round of applause and thanks for everyone.